right. It's one of my favorite characters in the Bible we're talking about today. It's not me. My namesake, though. All right, so we're in the new.
Meant to be like an author or the title.
That was the
All of the
title.
above.
That is not the author. So we're in the United Monarchy era, before the monarchy divides. We got through the Judges. The theme of the book of Judges was, in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit in his own eyes.
That's gonna have some problems, as shown by the Benjamites.
Yep. So the monarchy didn't allow them to do that. They had a king. People could not do as they saw fit in their own eyes. We're talking about David today. When we get back in full swing in the middle of January, we will have next unit on Solomon. So, one thing about the 15th, I know you two had various acquaintances and friends that were thinking they might be available after Christmas.
Yeah.
Anybody else you know who wants to or could possibly consider coming here, by all means invite them. It is the middle of the year. They did miss a lot. They'll be missing a lot of context. But we're about to go into like the dark era of everybody's Old Testament history knowledge.
Yeah.
And so it's like the best place to jump in.
It is a great place to jump in. So, there's that option. Tonight, David. Life of David is covered in sections of 1 Samuel you have perhaps started reading. Over Christmas, you'll be reading lots of 2 Samuel. And 1 Chronicles 11 through 29 also covers a lot of the reign of David, and that is not part of the reading. What?
I was just going like,
yes.
Like it's really good reading.
I've never heard anyone say that about the book of 1 Chronicles.
Okay,
Have you read that before?
Yeah, I have. I read through the entire Bible. I don't remember it.
Yeah, so the 1 Chronicles version of David's reign is a little drier.
Okay.
It does give an extended length version of some stories. Some stories are duplicated, and there's plenty of things that are missing.
How about David's Mighty Men?
Some of them are there.
Okay.
The better versions in 2 Samuel.
Okay.
Anyway, do you want to pull out your Psalms and Proverbs handout? In the handout section of your binder.
I don't know if I remember to put it in the
Yes.
I did. Good job.
So,
I'm so happy that we can math.
David wrote a great many Psalms.
Oh, that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a little. Hold on.
So Dad has this handout that says who wrote which Psalms and which Psalms were written by David, which ones were written by the Sons of Korah, which ones were written
Yep.
by Solomon. I believe.
So it's the book of Job and the book of Psalms, not Proverbs.
May have gotten a little snatched.
Don't know where I put it.
It's okay. Keep digging. So Micaiah,
Oh, I
I'm going
don't
to start counting. You can borrow your neighbor's handout.
counting what?
How many Psalms did David write?
No dear.
Do you want me to count too?
You can go ahead.
Oh dear. 41 minus 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's 37.
I can't.
Hi, Miles.
You found it in the timeline section.
I have no idea where I started.
71.
counting. I believe it's 71.
Do I hear 72? Do I hear 73?
You made me lost my count. Okay, hold on.
Here, I can count it.
No. Just be.
Do you see it there?
Oh, I found it over.
$71.
71. There may be a few more. There's plenty of Psalms that are unknown authorage. Some of those are probably David. This is actually when a large portion of the book of Psalms actually starts coming into existence throughout all the travails and turmoils and difficulties of David's life.
Did he write any before he was king?
Maybe.
Unknown.
Yeah, don't know. There's plenty of them that are not pegged to a certain part of his life. He was hanging out with sheep, he had a lyre, he was known to be able to play skillfully, so he might have been composing when he was young.
I suppose.
And then just like, I'm the king. This is the hit song of the year. So, any other psalms written before David, from what you can tell?
From before.
From looking at the, any psalms predate.
There's Moses.
Moses, yep.
Moses wrote one?
Moses wrote a psalm.
What about
Singular psalm.
Ethan the Ezrahite?
He's definitely later.
Okay.
Sons of Korah. Later. Wait, Korah, like, not the one Korah dude who
It might be
rebelled.
that Korah, actually. His son survived that.
They
And
did?
Yes.
Wait, which Korah?
So there was the rebellion in the wilderness where the earth swallowed up a whole bunch of the
Okay.
rebels. Well, Korah ended up either getting swallowed up or burned up. I can't remember which side of the judgment he was on.
And not anything Abel wants to think
I
about.
believe his sons were not involved in that. And there's an interesting redemption. If they wrote Psalms, they were relatives of Moses.
Interesting.
So,
So they would have theoretically some way for him to survive.
mhm.
How
So-
many were written by the Sons of Korah?
How was it figured out, like, who wrote the things that we do know? Does it say?
It actually says in the title of the Psalms, there's a little part, and that's actually in the Hebrew, written right in there at the beginning. It's usually not given a verse, and so you can, but if you look it up in a concordance, it will have those words listed as being part of the Bible, and it'll just have a T next to it because they consider that part of the title for the psalm. So some psalms have a description underneath it, and that's actually preserved in Hebrew as part of the tradition. Scribal tradition is not added information. And if there's nothing there, they don't put anything there.
Wow.
Some of them is just of David. Other ones are a psalm of David according to Shigionoth, which nobody knows what that word means. And it'll say to the tune of do not destroy or a fawn among the lilies or something like that. And it's some other song. It's just like, don't know what that one is, but that was a common tune. There's several of them that are to the tune of do not destroy. It was a famous tune. Yes, it's a very famous tune.
That's great.
That hasn't been preserved in any way.
Not that I'm aware of. The Dead Sea Scrolls have a few extra psalms that didn't make it into the biblical canon, though, and I haven't read the translation of any of those. So there are actually other forms of poetry. We'll dig into the poetical forms of psalms sometime in the new year, but
Remember when I tried to sing the Psalms?
you know that memory didn't stick tight in my head.
Probably for good reason.
Anyway, so this is where we start getting another piece of the Bible actually coming into existence. Up to this point, we have the 5 books of Moses and the book of Job, presumably, assuming that Moses is the one that wrote that one down for the Israelites. Now we're starting to get some of the Psalms written. But otherwise, all the prophetic books have yet to be written. All the poetry of Solomon has yet to be written because Solomon hasn't been born. But we're starting to flesh things out. The book of the Judges may have been written, but maybe not, because in those days it said that Israel had no king. And it seems to be the writer reminding people that, well, we have a king now, but back then they didn't used to. So maybe Judges had not yet been written. Or maybe it was written in the days of Saul. Don't know.
Or maybe that's just it was told through the generations. That's just an explanation that they had.
Yep, that got tacked in. There's a few of those actually, where it's like the rest of the book looks like it was written here, but this one verse looks like it may have been slipped in as an explanation for later generations to understand. There's several of those throughout the scriptures. Yep.
Interesting.
So, all right. So we were looking last week at the outline of 1 Samuel. We're going to be looking at the second half of this. We're in chapters 16 through 31 here. So David gets anointed. This is perilous. Samuel is given a pretense by God himself on how to get to Bethlehem without raising any eyebrows by Saul, because Saul is very much still king, very much alive, very defensive of his throne, especially sensitive on the issue since Samuel just prophesied that God was going to rip it from his hands. So Samuel was a bit concerned for his life and limb and going to anoint the new king. So God said, go on, offer a sacrifice in Bethlehem, and while you're there, anoint one of Jesse's sons as king.
So I wonder if Jesse was like a well-known dude or whatever, or whether it's just when I get there, I'll figure out who Jesse is.
It could very easily be that. Bethlehem is not a large population center. It'd be like showing up in Woodville and saying like, find me Jesse. Like, second house on the left. So, if you remember from the genealogy, David is the great-grandson of Ruth and Boaz. He's anointed by Samuel to be king. He does not become the king right away, but we have an interesting thing happen because the Spirit of the Lord left Saul, and a tormenting spirit came upon him. And shortly after that, when David is anointed, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon David powerfully. This works out in Saul's favor, actually, because then he gets David to come to the court and play the lyre to soothe him when the evil spirit from the Lord would torment him. He had no idea that this young upstart musician was going to become the next
Evil
king.
start from the Lord, so the Lord was tormenting him.
Yeah, it's an interesting feature in that book of the Old Testament. It specifies an unclean spirit or an evil spirit from the Lord.
I noticed that. I was like, that's very peculiar.
Yes.
So do you think that it's like, since no evil spirit can do anything without the permission of God, do you think it's God just allowed one to enter Saul, or it was sent by God? Or
So-
do you think it more was God tormenting him?
In the New Testament, we like to think about evil spirits being allowed or having opportunity or being given opportunity by the sins of a person. But in the Old Testament, in this king's era especially, they are messengers and actors on God's behalf, just like an angel. So this happens one other time with another king. But yeah, in this case, this one seems to be at the command of God. So it's interesting. It speaks to his sovereignty. Even the evil spirits are commanded by him and to accomplish his purposes and wills. I don't like to get too deep into the implications of that because there's not very many references to it, but this one very clearly lays it out. The Lord sent an evil spirit, an unclean spirit. So
So why would God be working against himself then?
he's not.
His spirit in David is working against against his spirit in Saul.
I see what you're saying.
David was never against Saul, though.
Yeah,
David throughout all of
David
Saul
was
trying to
soothing
kill him.
Saul. Well, the God was trying to.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's an interesting dynamic, but because of the evil spirit that was sent by the Lord to torment Saul, Saul's attendants were like, hey, I know this musician, we can get him here. And so then they called David up to play music for him. And so in some ways it seems as if the
Evil spirit
was a way to get David right into the king's court. Because David for a long time here ends up seeing firsthand what it's like to be king and is given a measure of authority from the king. But he doesn't have to be the king at the age of 15, 17, or 18 without any of the trust. And so he's able to operate under Saul, grow into the position essentially. And the way that he ends up in Saul's court initially is because he can play music to soothe Saul's spirit when he's being tormented. So it accomplished that purpose, and it was an interesting back and forth between them. So.
And this was before David and Goliath?
And this was before David and Goliath.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it makes
And
me
it continues after David and
It
Goliath.
makes me wonder if that's why Saul was so hesitant to send David into battle. Because he's like, this is my musician, I need him.
Yes, this is my emotional support guy.
Emotional support
Yeah.
you need, yes.
Exactly. Are you sure you want to do this? Not sure if I want to. Take my armor.
Yeah.
So that's what happens next. We have Goliath. And David is still young. He has been in the presence of Saul from time to time. So he's gained favor as being a musician, and this is how he gains favor of being a warrior, because no one in the army wants to take on Goliath. And it's kind of interesting because everybody in his army was just thinking, like, I can't go sword to sword against Goliath. And David just thinks outside the box. Like,
Yeah.
he's your kind of guy. He's just like, I can't miss him. Like, 1,000 feet away, I can totally hit this guy. He's huge, and I've got range far further than he can throw a spear. And so, like, it wasn't even a fair fight in any way, shape, or form,
Yeah.
because David has got a stone that he can sling really accurately.
He got ammunition.
He's got ammunition to spare, and those.
Oh wait, wasn't his
Well, I had
ammunition?
4 brothers though.
Yeah, wasn't his ammunition to spare to take out Goliath's brothers?
There's no shortage of men behind Goliath. Yes.
But I know, but you.
Yep. So, and he's got his brothers. Yep. But he can hurl those stones at like 150 mile an hour, and I
It's
would
not
not
fair
want to
fight at
see
all.
what that does to a person.
I
Especially
don't
when
want to
it-
see what it does to a person.
No.
Especially since it hit him in the forehead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no need to go any further.
Yep. Anyway, so David slays him. Israel starts singing David's praises, and this provokes Saul's jealousy, because the tune went, Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands, and that irked Saul to no end. So this starts becoming a divisive issue. However, he does become a soldier in Saul's service,
Wasn't he
officer.
his armor bearer?
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yep, he's an armor bearer, which is like an officer or a military assistant of some sort. He ends up becoming a very successful military leader, fighting wars and campaigns against the Philistines. Saul is just hoping that the Philistines will kill him in battle, and they'll take care of him. Doesn't work. He's still playing the lyre when Saul is tormented. Saul throws a spear at him, tries to pin him to the wall. Doesn't work. Jonathan helps get the two of them back in good graces with each other again. Then Saul tries to offer him a daughter in marriage, and that was actually a reward for killing Goliath.
Yeah.
That was stated. And David declines the older daughter. He didn't like the terms. And he accepted the bride price for Michael, though, doubles it, and gets married to the younger daughter.
Wait, is that how
That's
you
a,
pronounce
that's
it?
very interesting.
Michael.
Bride price. I read that this week.
Oh
Yes.
yeah, I read that
Very
too.
interesting.
Yes, this is a huge thing between the Israelites and the Philistines, because the Israelites were
gathered that.
circumcised and the Philistines were not circumcised. And so the Israelites were like, let's just go circumcise the Philistines. And they did.
Off their dead bodies.
Yes. That would be a war crime today.
Yes.
No.
Oh my
But
goodness.
that was fair game back then.
Well, they didn't have like rules of combat back then.
Nope. Geneva was not a city yet.
Nope.
Things break down between Saul and David, though. Saul tries to kill him with a spear again, so David flees into the wilderness. He has a band of 600 misfits, outlaws, and outcasts end up joining him. He becomes their leader. Kind of like a Robin Hood circumstance here for a while. And so David goes from being in Saul's good graces and close confidant, son-in-law, marrying his daughter, to outlaw, outcast, and being driven away from his own land. Saul pursues David for a really long time. We don't know exactly how many years this is, but it seems to be a lengthy period of time. In the process, Saul has all the priests of Nob killed because they were accused of helping David.
Which
They
they
unknowingly did. David attacks the Philistines at Keilah. Saul's tipped off that's where he's at. So then Saul sends his army to get David in the city of Keilah. David flees, goes off to the wilderness. He has two opportunities to kill Saul, but he refuses to do it. First time he's in a cave. Saul has to go to the bathroom. Very vulnerable. He's literally caught with his pants down. David does not kill him. Second time, the Spirit of the Lord puts the whole army around Saul into a deep, deep sleep, and David and one of the sons of Zeruiah, Abishai,
Yes.
walk over into the camp, And Abishai is really zealous, and he's like, I just need to strike him once, it won't take twice. And David's like, we're not here to kill him, we're taking a water jar and his spear so he knows we were here and did not kill him. So,
That's really good diplomacy.
it was
Like,
It's
David was a genius several times over.
several times over. So after that, Saul stops pursuing him, but David doesn't trust that he's going to stops pursuing him. And so he actually just flees to the Philistines with his band of men. Now, this is huge irony because David goes to Gath, Goliath's hometown. His brothers are all still there. David quickly is like, we shouldn't stay in Gath. You have a little village that we could take over. So he's given the village of Ziklag, which is outside of Gath, outlying village. He and his men live there for 1 year and 4 months, it says. So he pulls off a shrewd deception by telling the Philistine king, I'm raiding the Israelites in Judah, or I'm raiding their allies, the Kenites in the Negev. And in reality, he's actually raiding the Geshurites and the Girzites and the Amalekites.
But he leaves no survivors.
But he's leaving no survivors, so nobody can tell the Philistines anything about what he's actually doing. So he's getting in the good graces of the Philistines. At the same time, he's getting lots of plunder from the enemies of the people of Judah and giving gifts to all the elders of Judah. So he's getting into their good graces for 1 year and 4 months. And then all of a sudden, war breaks out between Israel and Judah again. And
wait, Israel and Judah?
Israel and the Philistines.
Okay.
Yep, thank you. War with the Philistines again. This is the battle that Saul dies in, along with his 3 sons. Was that chapter in the reading, or is that coming up?
That's coming
That's
out.
coming
Coming up. Yep. So David almost ends up fighting against the Israelites on the side of the Philistines.
I did not know this.
The Philistine kings realize, isn't this David who they sing, David has slayed his tens of thousands? How better to get back in with Saul than to cut us down from behind and bring our heads to Saul, his master. And so they say, send David away. The king of Gath likes David, doesn't want to send him away, but he's like, they won't let me fight with you, so you have to go home. And this is a calamity, actually, when they get back to Ziklag. Ziklag is burned, and all their wives and children have been carried off. So they have to go hunt them down. It was done by the Amalekites, who Saul was supposed to have destroyed.
Of course,
Yeah.
it goes back to Saul.
There's a crazy episode. First Samuel is filled with crazy episodes. So Saul is no longer able to hear the will of the Lord, and so he decides to summon Samuel back from the dead by consulting the witch of Endor.
This, okay.
This is 1 Samuel 28.
Yes, Emil, this is in the children's Bible, that and we know it.
I know. I've known this story for forever. I just didn't know how it fits into the picture.
Same.
Yes. So
Is Endor like a location?
it's a village.
It's not a planet.
Yep. In the Star Wars trilogy, it's a moon of, or it's a planet.
That's why it sounds
Yeah,
familiar.
that's why. Yes, that's the planet with all the Ewoks. There are no Ewoks at Endor, but there was a
giant
witch.
furry teddy bears.
No giant furry teddy bears. Yes. So the strange thing is that it seems like the witch is actually able to bring Samuel back from the grave and have a conversation with him. Samuel accurately prophesies to Saul, you and your sons are going to die and join me in the grave in the battle tomorrow because God has stripped the kingdom from your hands and has given it to one better than you.
And the Witch of Endor also recognizes Samuel.
Yep.
And
Wasn't she like afraid or something?
She was terrified because she realized that Saul, the king of Israel, who expelled all the witches and mediums from the land of Israel, was the very person in front of her trying to do business with her. And she's like, I'm going to die. And Saul's like, you're not going to die. I'm not going to put you to death. That was the judgment for being a witch. Everything Samuel says through the witch comes true. Saul and his 3 sons die in the battle the next day. So, as messy as presidential elections in the United States seem to be, once you start reading through the challenges of kings succeeding one another, you're going to realize that our presidential elections are really tame affairs. This causes a civil war breaking out for 5 years in the land of Israel and Judah. Saul had a fourth son by the name of Ishbosheth, who survived that battle, and he gets put on the throne of Israel by Abner, the commander-in-chief of the army, after Saul is dead. So, Judah is already in the good graces of David. They welcome him back from the land of the Philistines, and they make him king in Hebron. So now we have 2 rival kings in the same country.
Oh,
That's a problem.
fun.
So they start fighting each other, of course. Lasts about 5 years. There are some very messy battles that take place in that. Part
And
of
this
Second
is the
Samuel.
United Kingdom?
Yeah, and this is the United Kingdom period. Ishbosheth grows weaker and eventually gets assassinated by his own men.
Oh yeah, and then they bring his head to David, and
Yep.
David kills those men.
Yep, you're going to read it soon. David reigns in Hebron, which is one of the cities of refuge in the tribe of Judah. That's his capital for 7 years and 6 months. And at that point, all Israel comes to him and makes him king over all the tribes of Israel. And from there, he goes to Jerusalem, which is still under the control of the Jebusites, Canaanite tribe. He takes it from the Jebusites. He doesn't exterminate all the Jebusites, though, because one of them is still alive a long time later. But he makes Jerusalem his capital. He reigns there for 33 more years after the 7 years and 6 months.
Why was Jerusalem in the hand of the Jebusites?
They had never driven them out fully. It was destroyed in the conquest, but they apparently did not inhabit it, and the Jebusites got back into it, and they were there throughout the course of the whole period of the Judges. It was a really good geographic location because neither Judah nor Benjamin actually had claim to Jerusalem.
Oh, so it's like D.C., Washington.
Yep,
D.C.
so it's very much like Washington, D.C.
No.
Neutral ground, no tribe has complete claim on it. So better than Hebron in that respect. Like his predecessor, David fights lots and lots of wars. He actually conquers the remainder of the inheritance. So the tribal inheritance map that we look at through the course of his reign comes fully under the control of Israel during his reign. He subdues all their neighbors that they weren't necessarily supposed to exterminate, like the Philistines and then their relatives, the Edomites, the Moabites, and
weren't
the
supposed to?
Ammonites.
Destroy them?
So they're supposed to utterly destroy the Canaanites, but they were not supposed to take the land of the Moabites, the Ammonites, because they're their relatives. Same with the Edomites. The Philistines kind of moved into an area at some point, but they were not Canaanites, so they were going to just simply be neighbors. And so they didn't exterminate them, but they subjugated them, and so they paid tribute to David
Gotcha.
and Solomon thereafter. And towards the end of his reign, he was stretching out really far. He actually subdued people stretching from Damascus all the way to the Euphrates. It was a very large extent of modern-day Syria.
I remembered reading that they had like no weapons, it was all farm materials that they were using to fight. Is that still true over the time of David's reign?
Nope, they start revving up their weapons production. So at the very beginning of Saul's reign, Saul and his son Jonathan were the only two that had swords. Everybody else just had farm implements. And so that was tough fighting. And the reason for that actually is exactly the same thing that the United States and China are squabbling about with the computer chips today, if you read the news. We're trying to prevent the computer chip technology from getting to China so that we have a military advantage over the top of them. The Philistines did the same things with the Israelites back then. This was the beginning of the Iron Age, so to speak. So Iron Age technology is relatively new. And the advantage over bronze is that iron is much harder and much stronger. And so it makes a better sword and it makes for better armor. But you have to heat up your fire an awful lot hotter to be able to smelt the iron and make it useful. And the technology to do that, the process, required a few discoveries that was not particularly well known. So what the Philistines did is they just simply took every single blacksmith from the land of Israel and carted them off to the land of the Philistines. So there were no blacksmiths in the land of Israel at the very beginning of
So
Saul's
then
reign.
you can make money off of them because everyone who has an iron implement has to go to the Philistines to get it fixed. You make really good money off of that. And
Yep.
then also, if you ever decide to go to war with them, you got an easy victory essentially,
Yeah,
presumably.
so you picked up there on a very key point. But by David's reign, swords and spears were getting to be a good deal more commonplace amongst the Israelites. So reading 2 Samuel is an interesting thing when you remember that most of historical accounts are trying to paint the main character in the most favorable light of all time. So if you ever read any historical accounts of the conquests of Alexander the Great, because he brought historians along with him to write down how everything went, you get a very rose-colored picture of who Alexander the Great was and how awesome he was. And then there's some amazing embellishments, like he comes across a tribe of Amazons, and they don't know that actually exists, but it sounds really good when you're writing to a group of people that believe Amazons exist, and Alexander the Great marries one of them. But anyway, 2 Samuel does not try to paint David in the most positive light of all time. In fact, if you were going to read the book, you would almost think that this was written by one of his enemies, because you gloss over all the wars and all the battles and the victories and subduing all the nations around them, which is one of the main roles of the king, and the writer laser focuses in on his sin with Bathsheba very quickly, and then documents all of the ongoing fallout from that sin all the way to the very end of his reign, and then throws a few other black marks in there just for the fun of it too at the end. And that is largely missing from the First Chronicles account. So the First Chronicles account does not give all the mud, so to speak.
It just is
So
a
that's the
highlight.
version David approved.
That was the officially approved
So
version,
First
yes.
Chronicles was a highlight reel.
Yep, First Chronicles was a highlight reel, and actually it's more like the end credits, because it's a large list of names, like these are the gatekeepers appointed by David, these are the priests appointed by David, and so forth. Yes.
Gotcha.
Credits reel. In this phenomena of like having approved sanitized histories was so well known throughout the whole world that the Chinese emperors actually had a policy where there was the official historian for the emperor, and anything they wrote down was sealed and not available to the public or the emperor for the duration of the emperor's reign, and only after the emperor died could anybody read anything of it. So the historian had complete license to write down whatever he saw that history might want to say about it, because the
That's
Chinese had the long-term perspective and like, our posterity needs to learn from our mistakes and they'll never know about them if we never write about them. The Egyptians like sanitized. The thing was cleaned, and like then a couple generations later, if you had something that was not well thought of, then they just chiseled it right out of the stone, and then they just cook up their own story and put it over the top in plaster. Actually, yes.
Like,
Egyptians wrote their history in stone, but they edited it in stone. That was a regular occurrence.
huh.
Anyway, so David sins with Bathsheba. He commits adultery with her. She's the wife of Uriah the Hittite, who is one of David's mighty men. So he's a close confidant and officer in his army.
That is disappointing.
This takes place during a campaign against the Ammonites. David tries to get this covered up by having Uriah put in a thick, fierce part of the battle. Uriah does die. David thinks he's free and clear, marries Bathsheba. She has a son until the prophet Nathan shows up. Nathan is a prophet like Samuel. Doesn't write a book, though, like Isaiah or Jeremiah did. Key thing about David, he was a man after God's own heart. He repented of his sin immediately. And that is the biggest lesson to take away from David's life. However, David had already set forth his own judgment. Nathan the prophet tells a parable, and David is so outraged by the injustice served in this parable, he says the man who did this must pay for it fourfold. And that is exactly what happened to him. So the son born to Bathsheba dies, And then his firstborn son, the crown prince Amnon, gets killed by Absalom, who is David's third-born son. Then Absalom ends up trying to take the throne and kill David. He gets killed in a battle by Joab. And then when we get to the transition to Solomon being king, Adonijah ends up dying in that transition too.
He's killed by Solomon.
Yes, he's executed. Benaniah is actually the one who wields the sword that kills Adonijah, but Solomon commands him to do it.
Okay.
It's like
what did he do that made Solomon need to kill him?
he tried to marry one of the former, like,
Concubine of David.
yeah.
He was trying to undermine Solomon politically. It was one of those actions where to us it's just like, I don't get it, but it was like Solomon's response was, why don't you just ask for the whole kingdom? Like, anyhow, so it was a major affront. And
So then Adonijah takes a hold of the horns of the altar or whatever,
yep.
and then Benaniah strikes him down there.
So that will be in the reading. That's actually in 1 Kings 1 or 2. So we've jumped through the entire book of 2 Samuel here. But anyway, so David has consequences for his sin with Bathsheba. And killing Uriah costs him 4 of his own sons.
Wait, I need to write them down.
Didn't he have a whole bunch of sons though?
Like over 50.
Yeah.
But the firstborn, the thirdborn, and the fourthborn all end up dead prematurely. And then the firstborn son to Bathsheba, who is not his son, way down in the ranks, 12, 25, don't know. But
So that second-born son, I would love to be him.
second-born son survives, or he was already dead. We don't hear anything about him after he's born. His mother was Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel.
Wait. Abigail?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Like the Abigail from.
The Abigail. Mm-hmm.
so do we know
Oh.
which one? Do we know which one? Joseph is descended from.
Oh yeah.
You have to read that in Matthew. I'm pretty sure he comes from the line of kings, so he's would have been through Solomon.
So he was the rightful king?
No, because once you get to the exile, it starts going into names that are not significant to me. And so Joseph could have been the fourth-born son of a sixth-born son of a 12th-born son. We don't know. But
If you're
he
not,
is descended from the line of the kings of David that made it all the way to Zerubbabel, who was the leader of the people of Judah after the exile returned. And how the descent goes between those generations from Zerubbabel to Joseph, I'm not sure how high up in the ranks Joseph would have been. But yeah, Joseph was descended from them. Mary, I think it was thought that the Luke genealogy is her genealogy. And then that goes through another son of David, also one of Bathsheba's sons. The son there is by the name of Nathan. A different line of descent entirely. One of the things David intended to do but was not allowed to do was build a temple for the Ark of the Covenant. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem very early in his reign, sets it up in a tent right in his backyard, and wanted to build a big, large structure for it. God said no. He said that David's son would build a temple for the Lord. David decided that was good enough because that implied that his son was going to be king after him.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read the depths of First Chronicles at some point, you'll discover that David does everything but build the temple. He draws up plans, he stockpiles all the materials necessary for it.
really?
Yes, 3,750 tons of gold, 37,500 tons of silver,
That's a lot
bronze
of
and iron
material.
beyond measure. Yes, it's a lot of material.
I remember
You-
reading about all those cedar logs from Lebanon.
Requires all the cedar logs from Lebanon.
So his plunders and spoils from war
Mhm.
must have just been
Yep, but he also acquires all the craftsmen necessary to technologically pull off the endeavor. And
So basically, all Solomon has to do is just say go.
Yep. But we won't find out about that until the 15th of January.
Okay.
He also was a great organizer. So he got 24,000 people to supervise the work of the temple when they actually were going to begin building it, which he knew his son was going to begin building it. And so he had the workforce and all the foremen necessary for it. He set up 6,000 Levites as officials and judges. He enumerates another 4,000 of them as gatekeepers. And that's not because they had that many gates. They typically had a rotation that they would work through. So they would all have their own land, their own flocks and herds that they would manage most of the year. But then they would serve 2 weeks or possibly a full month as a gatekeeper or a musician.
So it's not they have 4,000 gates. It's they have like 200, but they have like a rotation where there's
Yep, they have a rotation.
20
And they'll have
or
several
so
people there
gatekeepers.
and taking shifts through the day and such.
Why did they need more than one gate?
Because there's more than one side to a city. So there's
So, 4.
well,
Presumably.
when you get to the account of Nehemiah rebuilding Jerusalem, I think there's a dozen gates to the city.
Oh, Jerusalem.
To Jerusalem, yep.
Just Jerusalem. And there's other cities, presumably.
Yeah. There were plenty of other cities, but the gatekeepers, I think, were the gatekeepers for Jerusalem. They didn't build too many other fortified cities before then, so maybe none. But he also lined up lots of musicians. He himself was a musician, and he had lots of skilled musicians in his group of acquaintances. Heman, Asaph, and Ethan are appointed over the top of all the musicians to be in charge.
Do we have any idea why God said no to David building the temple?
It says because he was a man of bloodshed, and some people interpret that to mean that he was a warrior and he killed a lot of Philistines, and so he wasn't going to. That's what disqualified him. Other people, and possibly because I think there's two interpretations. There's the Second Samuel version of the story, and then there's the First Chronicles version of the story. But one of them mentions his sin by killing Uriah the Hittite. But he does everything short of building the temple so Solomon can just say go. But that's important, we'll see, by the end of Solomon's reign, that David had spent all the time preparing for it. So, in all, this is our last slide here. David reigns 40 years and 6 months. Adonijah, his son, tries to set himself up as king right at the end of David's reign. He has Joab and Abiathar, one of the high priests, support. Adonijah's attempt fails immediately because Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba hear about this, and they orchestrate an ingenious way of getting Solomon on the throne that very day.
How did they do that again?
Read the story. It's quite lengthy. There's a very brief co-regency that lasted a few months because David put Solomon on the throne before he himself was dead, but he died very shortly after that.
You gotta wonder what that's like if they ever disagreed after that on what should be done. I'm the king. I was the king. I put you here. I can take you out.
Yeah, if you read the story about how Solomon gets on the throne, you get the idea that David is not doing real well and is more of a figurehead at this point and not really driving anything forward. And that's why his son Adonijah probably thought, I can seize the throne if I just take action because my father's not going to do anything about it.
My father can't do anything.
Can't do anything about it, yep. It was a few years earlier that his army officers said to him, no longer will you come out to fight our battles with us. You are staying in Jerusalem because we almost lost you to another Philistine.
Wait, they did?
Yeah, that's one of the stories. David almost died when one of Goliath's brothers came out to kill him in battle, and somebody saved him. I don't remember which one of his mighty men. But then they said to David, you cannot fight with us anymore. You stay in Jerusalem.
And David's like, darn it.
Yep. So, any questions about David's reign? We'll be reading pretty good in depth about it. There's a few parts of 2 Samuel that you're skimming over. If you want to do the extended length version, you can fill in all the chapters that I didn't specify, but don't feel like you have to because there's a lot of reading and it is the holidays. There's no shortage of things happening, so. All right. I'll collect the maps.